the rest of the world is taking all this in?
My reaction to that is that it's unrealistic. It's useful to distinguish between ceasefire or cessation of hostilities on one hand, peace on the other. Peace is asking an awful lot of both sides, and they're not ready for it. Peace means you agree to give up certain claims. You'd give up this on territory.
Parts of land, yeah.
What have it? Population movements. Neither side is even in that zip code. A ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities may not sound ambitious. Trust me, it's ambitious after 3.5 years of this phase of the war. And I actually think that's one of the mistakes of U.S. diplomacy. By introducing certain issues that would be part of peace talks, what in the Middle East we call final status issues, it's too much. It overloads the circuits. What you want is as simple and as clean as a ceasefire. May not sound like much. Trust me, it's a lot. It doesn't ask anyone to give up their long-term goals. You maybe have a separation of forces. It doesn't prevent, by the way, a restart to the war. It's one of the reasons that in all of this, and that hasn't been talked about a lot, what has to be decided by Donald Trump is what is long-term U.S. policy towards Ukraine. What kind of support are we going to give? What kind of help for them, pressure on the Russians? This doesn't take place, shall we say, in a vacuum. Diplomacy always takes place in a context.
Celeste, help me square this circle here. I'm going to play what President Trump had to say to Sean Hannity on Fox. This is after the meeting with President Putin. Watch this.
No, I'd rather not. I guess somebody's going to go public with it. They'll figure it out. But no, I don't want to do that. I want to see if we can get it done. It's not a done deal at all. But it's up to President Zelensky. I think we are, and if they'd like, I'll be at that next meeting. They're going to set up a meeting now between President Zelensky and President Putin. And myself, I guess, I didn't ask you about it. Not that I want to be there, but I want to make sure it gets done.
Okay, I wanted to play that, Celeste, because President Trump is putting all of the pressure on President Zelensky here. He is the one. It's up to him. Now, let me read you this from this man by the name of Miroshnik, who serves as the Russian Foreign Ministry's ambassador at large for the Kyiv regime's war crimes. It says here, as a leader of Ukraine, as he calls himself, Zelensky is unacceptable. He cannot sign anything. So how is a ceasefire or even a peace deal going to be possible when the Russians do not view President Zelensky as legitimate? And the president of the United States is saying it is up to the guy the Russians say is illegitimate to come up with a deal.
Well, thanks so much for setting that up so well. And I think you've done a great job of showing how difficult and complicated the situation is, as Richard also laid out extremely well. From the beginning, the stakes for Putin are not controlling territory in Ukraine. Controlling territory is instrumental to controlling the political leadership in Kyiv, having influence over Ukraine's foreign policy, security, and economy. And that is why they are talking about the illegitimacy of Zelensky, because one of the demands that Russia has made for a peace settlement is to be able to hold new elections with Russian influence, of course, in those elections, so that Putin's desired leader, the one he can work with to control Ukraine, is actually the president of Ukraine. So as Richard noted, there is so much distance between an acceptable peace settlement that at most what you could achieve is a ceasefire. And the reason you did not see any progress on a ceasefire in the discussions in Alaska is that Putin doesn't want a ceasefire because Putin believes that he is winning on the ground. That is the reason for these strategic attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, on cities, on civilians, as well as on the front lines of the battle. So Ukraine is ready for a ceasefire. Zelensky has said he's ready for a comprehensive or even partial ceasefire. But Putin's trying to change the game by talking about a final settlement that he knows is a long way off. He's buying time. And meanwhile, he gained legitimacy and he broke out of the isolation that the international community had put on him 11 years ago, the first time that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Richard, the thing that I think is striking us and also all the people around the world who are waking up to all of this news and trying to figure out what happened here is that Putin just a few years ago, just yesterday, 2 days ago, was a pariah, right? Most European leaders had not spoken to him in a very long time since he invaded Ukraine. But this NBC article that we have up today with this breaking news, Putin rehabilitated by reception in Alaska, and that's according to a German lawmaker. The quote is, "There is no ceasefire and there are no serious consequences," Roderick Kaisweider of the center-right CDU party told German broadcaster ARD today. Instead, Kaisweider said the summit allowed Presidents Putin and Trump to appear on the world stage as equals, and said Putin's red carpet reception of Putin was in blatant contradiction to the reception given to Zelensky at the White House. I assume that's Trump's red carpet reception of Putin there. You know, he got a ride in the beast, which doesn't happen that often. He got this flyover, you know, all these beautiful pictures, Donald Trump smiling and shaking his hand. He got to talk first during the remarks and last. What did the United States get out of this?
We'll just take a step back. You know, the idea of having a summit with Vladimir Putin, given everything you've talked about, it should have been made conditional.
Yeah.
To me, one of the most surprising things of Alaska was how unconditional the entire thing was. You're right. Putin not just was, but is a pariah.
Yeah.
The attacks continue. The war crimes continue.
While they were meeting, it appears.
Absolutely. So to give him an unconditional reception seems to me wrong. This all should have been wired, which is my larger point.
Yeah.
The idea that the American officials seem surprised and disappointed. Look, I've worked for several presidents. I worked for 4 years at the White House for George Bush the father. The idea that a president would go to a summit only to be surprised, these ought to be the most wired interactions. There were almost nothing left for uncertainty.
Lots of conversations that happened beforehand, the president just putting a bow on it.
Exactly. Yeah. 99% of it ought to be wired. Now, not a guarantee, but wired. This seems to me to have been just the opposite. And I don't know if Putin misled the United States, if the envoy, Steve Witkoff, simply got played. I don't know if Donald Trump simply was so cocky that he thought the power of his personality could bring Putin around. But the idea that you would have had Putin come, essentially get literally and figuratively the red carpet, and have virtually nothing result from it, and then the president leaves saying, so now it's up to Zelensky, it just seems to me something is wrong here with how this was handled diplomatically, how this was handled. The foreign policy craft, if you will, of this seems sorely lacking.
A summit that was put together in like 7 days. Usually they take months and months.
So can we just talk about the Allies' response? And we've heard lots of negative comments. Eugene read some from German officials. I want to put up this statement from UK Prime Minister Starmer on the meeting. It says, President Trump's efforts have brought us closer than ever before to ending Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. His leadership in pursuit of an end to the killing should be commended. While progress has been made, the next step must be further talks involving President Zelensky. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without him. We've already talked about the role of Zelensky, but I'm just wondering why. Can we talk about using Prime Minister Starmer's statement there and sort of the praise at the top of President Trump? How are European leaders viewing what President Trump did yesterday?
So Europeans, I think, are breathing a sigh of relief. They don't, they're not happy that there were the optics that there was this breakout from isolation of Putin. But they were working in a very, very clear, coordinated way to prevent significant damage from the meeting. That is the reason why they met with Zelensky ahead of time, why they coordinated discussions with President Trump ahead of time, and now they managed to get a conversation afterwards. Think of the Europeans right now as our major disaster management and prevention team working with Zelensky to prevent the United States from taking really bad steps. And the Europeans are doing a very good job of that since earlier this year. They did it at the NATO summit in The Hague. They laid the groundwork for making sure that President Trump got some of the outcomes that he was aiming for. And I think they're playing a very constructive role in keeping the White House within certain parameters in order to ensure that we don't have a complete break between President Trump and President Zelensky Zelensky, and Putin is not left standing there alone influencing President Trump, because that is what Putin has been aiming at. So you're seeing sort of a team approach to diplomacy, where Europe is actually helping to keep the United States, maybe not on the straight and narrow, but at least a little more straight and a little more narrow than otherwise would be the case.